Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whenever you should happen to find this. This is Unsummoned Skull, the host with the most, and this is the fourth episode of the Quote of Arms podcast. This is a podcast in which we talk about the tribes we like, what brings us together, and what they're like, how they win, why somebody would want to play it. So today I'm joined by...
Hi everyone, my name is Brandon and I run the Create Commander YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, and Twitter channels, or whatever they are on Twitter. I don't even know what that is anymore.
Awesome, well, great to have you today. So, what tribe is it that you would like to talk about?
Okay, so when we first began talking about this, I was thinking of, typically I'm an elf or a goblins player or something like that, like some sort of traditional tribe. However, there is one thing that I kind of wanted to go a little bit more off the rails on you. So I brought forth my Landfall tribal deck, which basically is, pretty much a bunch of landfall stuff and things that care about landfall triggers. And yeah, just play lands, get a lot of triggers from it. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
So one of the cool hallmarks of tribal decks is that not only do they have some sort of a rallying cry or an identity, but they also are they can be found on different planes in different places. So would you say that there's support for this landfall tribe from several different planes?
I would definitely say that, just simply because you obviously have the stuff from Zendikar, where you get the Avengers Zendikar and Angry Omnath and stuff like that really cares about landfall in particular. But then there are other places such as Ixalan, which has a card like Wayward Swordtooth that allows you to play an additional land on each of your turns, or even Theros, where you have Dryad of Ilsian Grove that allows you to play an additional land, and lands you control are every basic type. So just a bunch of different planes that can actually help your strategy, and you're not just penciled into Zendikar only.
Yes, absolutely. So there's also the Ravnica with Life from the Loam. There's
Sure.
Innistrad with Tireless Tracker. So they're from
Definitely.
all over the place. And so your deck winds up being kind of a mosaic of people and things and animals that happen to love the land.
Right, exactly. And, like you were saying, Innistrad and stuff like one of my favorite cards in this entire deck is actually Splendid Reclamation, and that came from Eldritch Moon.
So in what colors would you say that this grouping fits?
There are a number of different landfall commanders that are potentially available to you. You can go anywhere from mono green all the way up to even 4-color Omnath that was just released here in Zendikar Rising last year. The one that I particularly use, though, is Lord Windgrace, which is a Jund coloration, black, red, and green.
So which color would you say is the primary color?
I think anytime you think of lands in Magic in general, you probably have to side with green. And that shows through in most of the deck. A good portion of the creatures are green, a good portion of the spells are green, a lot of the red and stuff like that, and especially black is really a support color in this particular deck of mine. Red being more so, it pretty much goes green by a large margin, and then red, and then black is, if you can splash a color in EDH, I guess, that would be the splash in this particular deck.
Yeah, so it's sort of like the Lorax, I belong to the land, and stuff like that.
Yes.
Very
Speak
nice.
for the trees.
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. So this is very much green-based, and that was also clear from the list of cards that we went through. I believe most of them, if not all of them, were green.
Green or splashing a color. Angry Omnath splashes red, and that was one of the examples as well.
So before we talked about commanders, we were talking about like the different cards and planes that they come from. That's the part of the conversation I was referencing. So
yes.
Yeah, I believe most or all of those, because there's also there's the Valakut card that is an enchantment with landfall. That would be in red. I remember.
Yes.
We used to with fetch lands. We used to play. There was like a Boros Landfall deck in standard with the original Zendikar. That was a nasty deck with step links
Boros
and
Boros Landfall sounds kind of amazing because obviously four color Omnath. Yeah, the only coloration that Omnath doesn't have now basically is black.
hmm
So having a red-white focused landfall deck is really interesting sounding to me.
Well, that was in standard. I believe
Right.
another member of the server, his name was Ben. Ben D also has. I believe he has a red white deck that operates based on landfall. It's his Avacyn deck.
Oh, that's very lovely. I like that a lot.
In fact, he drew through his whole deck in one turn, and then I decked him with Blue Sun Zenith for one.
Oh, I mean, honestly, straight up, I'm going to be very, very honest with you. If there's a way to go, I would much rather fall on my own sword drawing all the cards than
Yep.
not. So,
Oh, absolutely. But it's also good to have a discard effect. So if somebody does try to
sure.
do that, you can just seismic assault and chuck a bunch of mountains at them.
Oh yeah, that's very true. My particular deck is kind of mill protected, so to speak. I have the Ulamog that when it hits the grave, it shuffles the graveyard back into the library, kind of thing.
Yes, but
Um,
the Valakut exploration, I think, exiles the cards.
oh, okay, got it.
When it exiles them, you can play them until end of turn, and
Okay,
it's usually used like a card draw effect. But he had so many landfall triggers that it wound up being used almost just to act as a mana severance for the one card he needed.
very nice.
Unfortunately, he
All
was too
right,
far down, and Blue Sun Zenith got him. But
that's
um,
still amazing. So,
yeah, so assault loam is a traditional strategy involving lands, involving loam, and especially involving the Gruul or Jund groupings.
sure.
Is that part of the aesthetic of the deck, or is it not
So
as much about the recursion aspect?
actually, this deck really leans much, much, much more on the land recursion part. Crack a fetch land, Crucible of Worlds, get it back, kind of thing, or reshape the earth and that sort of thing. What this deck really focuses on doing is it's really a combats deck. I purposely dumbed my deck down to where it did not have infinite combos. It did not have any of that kind of stuff in it. It just had a bunch of good Jundi value pieces for landfall,
Mm-hmm.
and like for example, Zendikar Rising, Morog, Fury of Akum, that
Nice.
creature that gives you the extra combats with landfall and stuff like that.
Yeah, especially
Um,
if you can do extra combats with Worm Harvest.
yeah, so yes, so Worm Harvest, Morog, uh, just the stuff like that. Essentially, what I wanted to always do in this deck is have Morog out on the field and then cast Reshape the Earth that came out in Commander Legends.
Mm-hmm.
Just 10 lands, boom, right there, plop, you know, or Scape Shift, whatever you can happen to get on there. Just get all the combats with, you know, Avengers, Zendikar, Baloths, or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much this one is very much a combats deck, and it's not intended to be combo off and beat everybody with a combo out of nowhere. You kind of really see it coming, if so to speak, but you can't really counter a land. You can
Right.
counter the trigger, but you can't really counter playing a land.
So thinking about sort of the identity. So this
Sure.
is so the lands matter, and you're talking about playing them out from the hand, playing them from the grave, playing them even maybe even from exile if you have a few different ways to do that, like maybe Oblivion Sower or Valakut Reclamation.
Hmm.
So what does that or what do you think that sort of looks like in the game itself?
So the deck, playing it, it's really just about trying to get Windgrace is obviously a planeswalker. He's one of the planeswalkers from, I think it is 17 or 18. I can't remember what set that was from now. But the whole point of the deck itself is to really get one of the value engines out and going, such as I've thrown the Gitrog monster into the 99, right? Phyleth from Zendikar Rising is in there. Angry Omnath, as I've mentioned, is also in there. Getting one of these value engines out there and then just playing and plopping down a bunch of lands to where I'm making a bunch of plant tokens or a bunch of beasts or elementals or whatever it might be is really the main goal of the deck, and just trying to make some tokens and go a little bit wide, actually, just at the expense of simply playing a land for turn and getting a bunch of triggers. That's really the identity of the deck, to be honest with you, is just get a value engine out, simply play a land for turn, trigger, and pretty much this deck is one of the reasons that I purchased some Infinite tokens.
Yeah, trigger the lands until you trigger the opponent.
Yeah, it will, and that's another thing about this particular deck is if you have a bunch of value engines on the battlefield, you can certainly... Turns can take a minute if you don't know how to play it well, so this is definitely one that I would recommend people sit down and kind of goldfish, if possible. Print out some proxies, goldfish it, just kind of see how the thing functions so that you're ready, because it's not impossible to legitimately take a 5+ minute turn with this particular deck, especially if you have an engine that allows you to play stuff out of the graveyard or multiple lands per turn and stuff. So it's like, land for turn, boom, trigger, do all that stuff. Okay, second land for turn, trigger, and the value for you is great. The value for your opponents is sitting there and watching you do stuff sometimes.
At least it's based on triggers.
But then they get smacked for it.
Yeah,
so,
At least it's based on triggers instead of lines, because that's a lot easier. That's a lot harder to pick up. If it's something like, okay, you need to have, if you have X, Y, and Z out, V happens.
Right.
And that's a lot harder to just hand somebody. But if it's, okay, your goal is to play lands from anywhere you can play lands from and activate things, it's a lot easier to hand somebody and for them to figure out.
Certainly. Yeah, and like you mentioned, though, I mean, I've played this deck for a couple of years now, and even now if I'm not paying attention, I'll miss a trigger sometimes or whatever, and it's like, oh, all right, well, I missed out on 2 or 3 pieces of value because I just plopped on it and forgot, so that sort of thing happens, and it's okay. Don't think that it's not, miss if you're a Magic player, you've missed a trigger in your life. I don't care who you are, unless this is your very first game, and then you probably missed a trigger. Right? So...
Yeah, you probably miss a trigger for at least one thing. Even if it's something that's technically not a trigger, like untapping lands, it's still considered... It's still missing something. Even though it's not technically a misbeneficial trigger, and it does wind up just happening anyways, it still, people miss it.
I was responding to somebody on Twitter actually at one point, and they were like, what is your idea of a successful game? And my idea of a successful game is actually not even winning or losing or whatever. Yes, of course, it's great to win. I personally like to have fun with the games. I like the decks to be evenly matched, and realistically, I like things to go pretty close. But my greatest achievement would be to play through a single Commander game and not miss a single trigger, because I'm not even joking. I guarantee you, in my years of playing, I cannot think of a game where I haven't missed at least one. So that would be my success story of the day.
Yeah, for me, thinking about a successful game, it's also not winning. It's or not necessarily, anyways. That just happens. But
sure,
for me, it's, I want to do something I've never seen before. It's one of the reasons why I keep building new decks, is because they're designed to do things I haven't seen before.
Yeah,
Maybe
fair,
it's use a
100%.
card in a new way. Maybe it's win a game using a different card. Maybe it's not even something that I personally do, but
Hmm.
I want to experience something I've never experienced before. That's why I keep playing.
Hey, everybody's got their own reasons and ways that they play Magic, or reasons to keep going,
Mm-hmm.
and that is definitely an honorable way to look at it. And realistically, I think that the Commander community in general would probably be a little bit better off if we focused less so much on the win and more so on the overall gameplay effect. Just because yes, you can obviously lock out a game and draw a game with 100 different combos, but if you draw a game, I mean, what's the point? You guys just wasted an hour. You know, or
Yeah.
you folks, I guess I should say, just wasted an hour. Whereas it, I like to obviously I like to see a conclusion to a game, and whether I win or lose, I'll say this till the cows come home. My favorite game of 2020 was a game that I played against Chain of Commander. Shout out, by the way,
Awesome.
to a gentleman we both know.
Mm-hmm.
I was in on a spell table pod with him and two other fine folks, and he and I got down to the final end there, and I was playing I was playing Browin and Shabraz, so the cycling deck, and he would do something with his Enchantress deck, and I would, the stack just got ridiculous because he would do something and then I would cycle, and then he would do something and I would cycle. I'm not even kidding you. I ended up decking myself just because I lost that game because I decked myself. But the gameplay itself was so much fun. It didn't matter that I lost. I'm happy that he won. I'm happy for him.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that we enjoyed the time together and had that moment that I know I won't forget that moment in my Commander gameplay, memories. But and it's much like this particular deck here. Like I know that there was a period of time where I was playing, I think, against Chain again, and another one of the friends of our channels, Neo, and this deck just went absolutely bonkers and put a bunch of stuff on the battlefield, and they were like, "Yeah, okay," and they they couldn't take the beats, and that's just one of the things this deck can do. Is if it functions great, man, it is tough. If it doesn't function great and you're not getting your landfall triggers, or you don't get a value engine, it's definitely one of those that's kind of feast or famine. Let's just put it that way, if that makes sense.
Does. Do you have ways in there for the deck to win from a bad position?
Define bad position, and I might be able to help you.
The other three players have more developed boards than you, and you don't have the draw engine ready.
So the draw engine ready, essentially, it would completely depend upon what pieces I do have in place. So
let's say you have three relatively developed opponents, and one of them Bajuka bogged you.
Bajuka bogged me. Bajuka bogged me will probably shut down, obviously, the Splendid Reclamations and stuff like that of the world, but I still do have Reshape the Earth and Escape Shift and some other stuff in here, to kind of get myself back in it, so long as I do have some form of an engine. Like if you give me a Phylath or a Rampaging Baloth or anything like that at that point, or heck, at that point, a Gitrog monster where I can Escape Shift, throw a few lands in the yard, draw some cards, or make some beasts, whatever it is, the deck can turn itself around in basically if you just get the right draw. If you go land, which can happen, in a thing like this where you have, typically more lands than I like to put in a lower CMC deck. It's hard for me to kind of get all these things across. Typically, if I have a CMC deck that's 3 or under, I usually don't put as much lands in the deck as I do in this particular one.
Mhm.
So I have seen where I've gotten mana flooded a few times. But if in the event of needing to rebuild my board state or whatever, somebody wraths, for example, I also have a few wraths in here that like toxic deluge or plague wind, stuff like that, just to be able to, kind of hit the reset button. And then that way, ideally, if I have one of my value engines within the next turn or two, I should be back in it.
So if you're playing more lands, what would you think of a card like Azure's Predation?
Azure's Predation is
Makes a 4/4 for each creature for each creature your opponents have, and then fights those creatures. So that would not only wipe the board, but it would make a board state.
Yes, and Azure's Predation, being recently reprinted in the newest Commander set, actually is one of the cards that I've really been just enamored with here recently.
Mm-hmm.
Just because the Quandrix commanders that double up tokens and that sort of thing really make that thing go crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it costs 8 mana, but if I'm playing more lands than anybody else, or ideally playing more lands than anybody else, 8 mana should not be the problem. So I think Azure's Predation is a fantastic card. I don't particularly have it in the deck just because this particular deck list that I have here hasn't changed at all since Commander Legends came out, and I obviously have a few more things with Kaldheim and Modern Horizons 2 coming up and some other stuff like that I'm going to have to kind of relook at this thing and see if there's anything else that doesn't necessarily combo but kind of really fits the theme that I want it to be.
Yeah, another one that works in terms of being like a singular board state card that I'll sometimes put into some of these graveyard decks that are doing shenanigans but aren't producing a board state. Be something like Army of the Damned. That one's from original Innistrad.
Yeah, that was that's the one that makes the zombies.
13. Yep.
13 zombies. I mean, that's
and then flashback.
It's hard to beat that,
And then flashback. So even if you happen to mill it while you're doing your Life in the Loam shenanigans, you can always just cast it from your graveyard and make a board state out of nowhere.
Yeah, this is definitely one, and realistically, like I said, with a bunch of different cards, Ancient Green Warden is a perfect example as well. Just you have Ancient Green Warden out, you can play lands from your graveyard, lands entering the battlefield that cause a triggered ability, such as Landfall, to happen, triggers an additional time, so doubling up those triggers just with Ancient Green Warden and, take your pick, Balos, okay. One fetch land now gets you 4 beasts, because you can play it from your graveyard, trigger, crack it, trigger, and you're realistically, even getting 4/4/4 beasts at that point, just having that ability it can rebuild pretty quick, and people are less likely to swing into something that can generate 4/4 beasts, at least 4 of them a turn, especially when the other 2 creatures are 5/7 and 6/6. So you get to definitely play some bigger, beefy stuff, kind of more mid to the later game. This is definitely not the fast deck, like I mentioned. This is definitely not the deck that's going to win turn 3 to 5. Not there. But I do have a couple of pet cards in here that, if you'd like to talk about them, I would love to talk about them.
Absolutely.
One of them is, and don't shoot the messenger here. One of them that I absolutely love is Spore Frog. So Spore Frog is in this deck simply as a 1-drop. Kind of, again, this deck is really meant and built to go later in the game. So if I can fog a combat that's going to do a lot of damage to me early enough or whatever to kind of just maintain, it's really what it's there for.
Do you have Roots or Unearths, or is it just for a one-shot?
I do have Eternal Witness to get it back and some stuff like that, if necessary. What's the other one in this deck that I love? Forgetting here. Vexing Shusher. I love Vexing Shusher just because it makes great use of the hybrid mana. And paying one, yes, of course, Rampaging Bailoff is already costing me 6. I would much rather pay 7 for it to make sure that it doesn't get countered.
Mm-hmm.
Or Avenger of Zendikar, or whatever.
Interesting.
So those are two of my pet things that are in here that I could definitely probably swap them out for something quote unquote better. But I like those 2 cards and they're in here because they have at least a little bit of utility that I think they're good for. And then finally the other one that I probably talk way too much about, especially if you watched my most recent video on Chatterfang, Tireless Tracker is in here. So obviously, if I reshape the Earth with a Tireless Tracker out, I'm going to be making 10 clue tokens. I like making stuff like that and being able to make clue tokens and draw cards and stuff like that. That's what I like to do.
So one of the cool things, if you're making a bunch of tokens that way, might be something like, what's that? So there's a 4-drop that destroys all artifacts and enchantments, and then make a 3/3 for each of them. That would be an interesting thought. Although it does hit some of your other things, and you might not want that. Like, you don't necessarily want to take out your own way to get your lands back.
Yeah, I mean, if it means me losing my Crucible of Worlds or something like that, if I don't have a Ramanap Excavator or something like that, Ancient Green Warden or whatever it might be, that might be something that I might not be too excited about. But at the same time, like I mentioned, I do have Eternal Witness. I do have Demonic Tutor in here, so if I'm like, oh, okay, I really need that Crucible of Worlds back, if I'm holding a Demonic Tutor, I can just go get it, So I do have a couple of the tutors in here. I do have a couple of the more expensive artifacts, like Sensei's Divining Top in here. That's just another pet card of mine. I've loved that card for years now. I cannot believe that it's almost $75, and that just hurts my brain.
I pulled one in my first booster pack, so I started playing the champs.
Goodness.
I had no idea how good it was. It's just an uncommon.
$75 uncommon.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy to me. Again, that's easily a card that could be reprinted, but and it will be reprinted in every single one of my decks that I want it to be via the cannon that's in the other room. So
it has been reprinted with a different art.
Oh yes, it was. What was that? It's a master set.
Yeah.
Can't remember which one it is.
Was
it Modern Masters? Eternal Masters?
I don't know. It was reprinted once with a different art. I know that much because I've seen the playmat with it.
Yep.
What would you think of, say, Seasons Past? Because I'm hearing you talk about tutors, and you have a late game grindy deck.
Let me look that up here real quick. Return any number of cards with different converted mana cost from your graveyard to your hand, and put Seasons Past on the bottom of its owner's library.
So if you return a tutor, then that's a slow loop, and you accumulate value that way.
Yeah, I could definitely see that as being very useful. How much? The question is, how much are cards like these? And the answer is, it's about $4. So, Oh man, Christine Choi's art is amazing. By the way.
Oh yeah, because that's my Umori deck. Is a green black Spellslinger, where Umori comes out and names sorcery, and so I do that loop, but it's cheaper. Umori also makes my ramp spells cheaper. It's another gross deck, and so it has a similar access though, and it's also a relatively slow deck. But once it gets that engine going, it's going to win eventually. Either it's going to outvalue everybody, or somebody's going to exile the graveyard, and then I just play a big sorcery. But it's going to happen. This is kind of the idea.
Right. Exactly. And another thing that the deck can easily be turned into a more combo route kind of thing. Like Togo, for example, the uncommon from Commander Legends.
Oh yeah, that's another cool new red pseudo landfall creature.
Exactly. So, obviously, it's kind of landfall. See, these are the kind of cards that I really enjoy and I really like because they're landfall without so much saying landfall, because they say, much like Tireless Tracker, whenever a land enters the battlefield. And for anybody listening, obviously, whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, create a colorless equipment artifact token named Rock. Togo make Rock. Blah blah blah. When it's equipped, sacrifice it, deals 2 damage to any target. Equip has 1, that sort of thing. That paired up with also a Commander Legends thing, Kodama, of the East Tree. Whenever another permanent, including a land, enters your battlefield under your control, if it wasn't put on the battlefield with this ability, you may put a permanent card of equal or less CMC, converted mana cost, or mana value, whatever you want to call it these days, from your hand onto the battlefield. That partnered with something like a Cloudstone Curio, you make a big loop or whatever. You can also use Kodama and Togo with even the bounce lands like Golgari Rot Farm. You're gonna get infinite landfall triggers at that point, and whatever value engine that you happen to have out at that point, whether it's Avenger making your plants giants, or you're just making beast after beast after beast. If I was going to go a combo kind of route, something like that is more likely the direction that I would take, just because it's Kodama's a 6-mana creature, so it's big, right? It's not something that you're just going to be able to plop out turn 2 and be like, hey guys, I won. That's not really what I'm necessarily about. Like, I don't necessarily like to play that way.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
There are some interesting things though with regards to the extra land drops if you're playing like exploration effects. And it sounded like you had at least one with Wayward Swordtooth and bounce lands. You'll be able to reuse and reuse some things like that. Also, things like Tunneling Geopede.
Tunneling Geopede. I'll have to look that one up.
That's from Battle for Zendikar. It's a 3-mana, 3/2 with landfall, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, deals 1 damage to each opponent.
Oh yeah, see that right there is the kind of stuff that I really like. Like even what's the ones from the retreats? So
Hagra,
like
I love that one.
Sorry?
I love Retreat to Hagra.
Right, yes. Okay, so Retreat to Hagra, effects like that interest me more in just trying to see what happens with this than necessarily, going large and in charge and whatever. Like even having something like a Akum Hellkite or whatever, if I can just keep bouncing a mountain back to my hand and playing a mountain or whatever and just smacking people for 2 damage with Akum Hellkite's landfall trigger, that interests me more than putting together some combo like, all right, here it is. This is everything. Here it is on the board. Good luck, guys. That's the kind of stuff that interests me a lot more.
Yeah, I can see that. It's always nicer to have an interactive style rather than, okay, can anybody mess with this? No, I guess I win.
Yeah, that really that doesn't bear much interest to me. I like to have that kind of interaction of, all right, my plant tokens have become 6/6s just in 2 turns, and I have like 8 of them. Can you block any of them? Or, don't get me wrong, that's great, that's awesome, that's fun to a certain extent, but being able to be like, okay, here, this is going to do this, and this is going to do this. Can you do anything about this? And this is also, by the way, going to trigger this. Just I don't know. The bigger brain stuff like that really interests me, and while it might not be the most quote unquote competitive thing, it's something that definitely interests me more than just, here it is, I win the game.
But we're talking competitive. You're talking to somebody who like will give themselves a lich and then use final parting, or not final parting. What was it? Give
Yeah,
themselves a lich and then make everybody's life total 0.
right.
I'm gonna do crazy stuff like
simple
that.
things like here's a card for you that I haven't mentioned yet. Perilous Forays. Perilous Forays I love in this deck because it's like, oh, okay, here it is. I made a plant. Okay, I'm gonna tap this, sacrifice a plant, go find another basic land. Basically, I can get all my basic lands out of the deck just with Perilous Forays. You know, and then obviously that's landfall trigger after landfall trigger after. I have this beast token that I'm making or whatever, and I just sacrifice the new beast token and make another one. Sacrifice new beast token. So by the time it's all said and done with, my whole turn, I may not be up by any more, beast tokens, but the next turn I got every basic land that I have in my entire deck, right? Ready for my use. So that kind of stuff is fun for me.
And if you're playing a deck with straight up lines, then you're probably not going to surprise yourself. You'll just play a line.
Yeah, and it's more about people playing a land in Magic is not necessarily considered to be that devastating, and I just like it when I do play a deck like this where it's like, oh, okay, that's not really, oh, he's just going to be playing lands. That's my favorite thing when somebody's just like, oh, yeah, he's just going to be playing a bunch of lands.
One of my favorite.
Yeah, you're right. I am going to play a bunch of lands, and I'm going to get a lot of value from it,
Yeah, one of my favorite wins in any format of all time was I believe it was in an extended PTQ. So this was a while ago. It was extended. It still existed. And I was playing a Scape Shift deck. It was a Timer Color Scape Shift deck. And I couldn't afford, or at least they didn't have one breeding pool, and so I was playing one extra mountain. So my opponent let me Scape Shift, because I was playing against Soul Sisters, so they had a gaudy life total already.
Sure.
So the opponent, so my Scape Shift resolved. I was trying to see just how much I could possibly deal. And I still had one card in hand. So they didn't believe that I could mathematically do enough to eliminate them, but they weren't counting on me playing a land for the turn. I'm going to Scape Shift for as much as I can possibly do, and then play a land for turn. Wait, you had one more? Yeah, most decks play 16, I'm playing 17.
Love it. See, that right there, yes. Yes, that. All of that. Just now, let's be honest here. If I sit down to a table, and you definitely have to pick your pods carefully with a deck like this. If you're playing in a go fast pod, you're not going to have that much fun. Same thing, like if you sit down and the person sitting across the table from you is playing a Zozu deck, you should not play this deck. It's because Landfall, Zozu is, whenever land comes into play, Zozu is going to deal 2 to you for each land.
Oh yeah, Zozu would be really bad. Yeah.
Yeah, Zozu would make your life very, very, very bad. So I definitely don't recommend playing against a Zozu deck with this particular, or kill it immediately. Don't worry about anything else. Heck with the Eldrazi that's sitting over there or whatever. The Zozu's going to kill you before the Eldrazi will. So
yeah. One of the things you could think about, granted, there are going to be some tables that are just bad for you, but card like Pulsive. But if you're going against an aggressive table, you could put in cards like Pulsive Mirasa, which is one of my favorite of those types of effects, because gaining 6 life is big gain. And it returns a creature or land from the graveyard to the owner's hand, so that can allow you to either get something for landfall later, or buy back that big Avenger that they got rid of.
Right.
So you could insert some of those cards, like Grim Discovery. I'm not sure is in there, but inserting some of those cards that are good offensively and defensively can help shore up the early game if that's something that the deck has as sort of a weakness.
Yeah,
but
and
also
that's definitely something I would definitely want to consider. I know Pulsa Marasa has been on my radar for a little while because while, like you mentioned, you gain 6 life out of it, and sometimes, even 6 life because I don't have all the fancy fancy old dual lands and stuff like that. So if I'm going to go fetch a forest, for example, I'm going to go get a stomping ground. So if I want that to come in untapped, well, that fetch land and that stomping ground just cost me 3 life.
Mm-hmm.
And then people are going to be smacking me early game anyway because I'm not going to have much out. If I do, it's going to be like a bird of paradise or something like that. Spore frog. I don't have anything really threatening early game. So even just getting that 6 life back, essentially that can take care of 2 cracks of a fetch land and 2 free shock lands. So that's definitely something that I need to really look at. Because I've even gotten to the point where I've had a board state wide enough where somebody did not want to actually attack into me, but just for me to get my deck to function, and cracking fetch lands and stuff like that, and getting even basics, I actually ended up essentially killing myself, just because every time you pay life, you have to lose life.
Yeah, those are the breaks sometimes, eh?
That's the rules. That's what they say. That's what they told me anyway.
Well, no one ever told me life was going to be this way. Okay. Anyways, great place to end because we are friends. So, hope you have a wonderful day because so this has been the Quote of Arms podcast with
Brandon from Create Commander on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and Instagram.
And your host with the most has been Unsummoned Skull. So J-Ro, the Unsummoned Skull, who can be found at twitch.tv/Unsummoned Skull, on Twitter at Coach_J_RO, and on Discord with the skull symbol. Thank you very much, and hope you have a wonderful day.